the story is that by the time I was 25, I had made $500,000 in real estate, just moving every couple of years, buying a place, fixing it up, taking that income, buying another place, fixing it up. And I think when I was 25, I was staring at, $500,000 in my bank account, and I owned, some homes. And I was very, very interested in real estate. It was just something that I connected with as a child, architecture and design and real estate. So I used the proceeds from my primary residences to start buying land and building houses. I used the proceeds from that to start a real estate finance company, a mortgage company. And then I grew that company into the company that you and I partnered on much later in life.
From Wealth Creators USA, this is From Worry to Wealth, the podcast that shatters the myths and mystique surrounding wealth creation. As students, our schools and universities often neglect the crucial education on the core financial principles. I'm Ben Lyons. I'm a business owner, investor, entrepreneur, and author, and I'm joined by my business partner, Alex Fink. And together, we're here to inspire your journey towards improving your financial self. In a world buzzing with advice on the behaviors and mindset to become wealthy, we'll share proven processes tried and tested by our network of successful collaborators. So get ready to move past worry and move towards wealth and your improved financial self. Welcome back to the podcast, From Worry to Wealth. I'm really excited to be here with you and my co-host, Mr. Alex Fink, the one and only Alex Fink.
Yes, indeed.
And he is still sporting that black T-shirt that we love.
Same thing
much.
I wear every day.
Doesn't Simon Cowell wear a black T-shirt?
I assume.
You don't watch American Idol?
No, not really. I don't watch much television.
It's not American Idol. It's X Factor.
Is it?
America's Got Talent.
Yes.
Britain's Got Talent.
Okay.
Somebody's got talent. I'm not
All
sure
I know
if
is
it's
I
us,
have about 100.
but I know somebody has talent.
I have about 100 of these. So
you do?
I do.
Yeah. Are they labeled? How do you know that you're not wearing the same one twice?
Well, that is a good question. I'm going to have to work on that. Yeah. Put a process in place.
You should put fluorescent.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Okay. We digress.
Indeed.
Man, I am really excited about our topic today because in a previous or some other episode, we talked about me, but now we get to talk about something really, really fun. We're going to talk about Alex Fink. Are you ready, Alex?
Now I'm supposed to lay down for this portion of the podcast?
You can lay down. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
You just can't fall asleep.
That's okay. That's unfortunate.
So what's really exciting is we you were one of the case studies in the book From Worry to Wealth, which I got the pleasure of interviewing you, and you and I have worked together now for 2009, I guess ish, 15 years. Wow.
At least, yeah.
Holy cow, I'm old. Yeah. And it's been a hell of a ride. I've often, and this is for our viewers, my wife asks me about something and I say, well, honey, I think 2-dimensionally, but this guy, Alex, he thinks 3 or 4-dimensionally. It's pretty fascinated. And she says, well, what do you mean by that? I say, well, I see things a certain way, but for some reason, Alex is able to see 2, 3, or 4 steps ahead. Very interesting perspective how you approach things. Fascinatingly positive statement there. It's a talent that you have, and you're going to unravel some of that for us on this podcast. But again, this podcast is From Worry to Wealth, so we're going to dig into your whole story and also kind of relate to the wealth creation formula when you're going through all this. So take us back to when you were a little boy, Alex. Let's start there.
Born a very, very young boy. So
how young were you when you were born?
Very young.
Okay,
very young.
Just clarify.
Thank you for clarifying. That's important. So I think for me, when I think about where I am today, a lot of it has to do with the environment in which I was born and raised. Right. And
tell me about that. What do you mean by environment? How was that environment?
So if you or I were born in another country, for example, or in a different area, I think our experiences may be a little bit different, right? And so I feel like I'm pretty fortunate to have been born to, functional parents, right? That were reasonably intelligent. I think they're actually very intelligent. But even if you have parents that have some level of intelligence, I think you're in a better spot. But specifically for me, we're in a great country, right? the area in which I was born.
God bless America.
Yeah, right. God bless America. The area in which I was born was one of the most affluent areas of the country, and I think it had so Northern Virginia area.
Mm-hmm.
You're aware of that area.
Yep.
I think it has the highest median income in the county in which I was born. Has the highest median income, or at least at the time, in the country. The interesting thing was my family was not at that level. So when I would have friends come over to my house, they would say things like, "You live here?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, is that weird?" You know, I didn't really understand right at the time. So I think my parents shaped a lot of my childhood, right? Yeah. And I remember my parents always worrying about money, and always suggesting that things were expensive. And, I was geared around trying to figure out how to make money myself, because I felt bad asking my parents for money. So we lived in so I think they put me in a really good position in that I'm getting really good education where I grew up. They had made a lot of sacrifices for me. They were smart and intelligent people. And I think being in that environment was really helpful, right? So I had access to family that had been educated. I had access to family that were in various businesses. And I think the opportunities that I was given, unlike some of your story where you had to seek out opportunities kind of came to me through those relationships with my family. Ah. And so my dad was an electrical engineer focused on nuclear power plants, almost like a nuclear engineer. He had graduated with high honors, summa cum laude from a really, really good institution. And his was highly educated. So I learned, in my mind, almost nothing in school growing up, but I could come back to my parents and say, "I don't understand how the teacher's teaching this. Can you help me? Does it make sense?" And within something that a teacher would try to educate me on for an hour, where I would just tune out and be bored, my dad could break it down in maybe 30 seconds, right?
Okay.
And so as a consequence of that, though, I felt always like the least intelligent person in the room or the family. So I grew up thinking there's no way that I'll ever amount to anything that my father's done or my mother's done. And that my older brother was smarter. He was smarter. I mean, there's no questions. So I think I grew up, imagine growing up in a nice area where you have not such nice property, where you're in a good family, but you're probably the worst, right, of the family. And that was
call
how
that the black sheep.
That's right.
I think, Alex.
That's how I grew up.
Yeah.
And I really felt it, right? So I didn't have a lot of expectations growing up, other than I expected to be lesser than everybody else around me. But I think what it did for me is so my parents cared about me. They helped me, right? And my parents, got divorced when we were pretty young. So, lived with a combination over time of my father and my mother. But I never got the sense. One great thing they did is they never argued. They always made me feel like they were friends, even though they probably weren't. Right. But I always felt like whatever I did. So unlike a lot of kids, so one of the things that I've always seen with employees of ours, right, is that those employees who have some stability at home, which I don't think you had, right, growing up, were able to take risks that other folks couldn't take, right? And a lot of that, I think, holds people back. But for me, I had parents that cared about me, and I had parents that were pretty smart. And I think that shaped a lot of what I've done over the years, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. We talk about who we're influenced by, and it sounds like your parents were really a significant influence to you, not so much the teachers, it sounds like.
Yeah, not so much the teachers. And I think that I probably didn't. So I was always an unconventional thinker.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned some different ways I look at things, but if anybody that wanted me to go down a specific path, or if there were 50 people going one direction, I would automatically want to go the other direction. And I probably would want to have nothing to do with those people. So I'm not sure I even listened to them growing up, but having that example and having that stability, I think was pretty helpful for me.
So after high school, what happened to you after high school? I'm not even sure. How did you graduate high school? Because you have a story. Unconventionally, right?
Yeah. So I was never really much interested in school. I would sit in the classroom and I was pretty antsy. I wanted to do something that I thought was more productive, which is to make some money, or go do a sporting event or something. So in school, I would sit there, get concepts pretty fast, and get bored really, really fast. And so I would leave high school, and I had an amazing job. I know you're going to be jealous, at Pizza Hut, and I was killing it. Right?
I'm jealous.
Yeah, you should be jealous
because you got to eat.
I was able.
Well,
I love pizza. There's no question. Look at me. But so I was. So I think about 14 years old, I started working at Pizza Hut. I became an assistant manager at 15. They were like, "You're going places." They flew me out somewhere and said, "We're going to make you a manager, and you're going to make 30-some thousand a year." And I was like, "I don't think that's really what I'm into," but I appreciate it. So I skipped a lot of school. So I think my sophomore year of high school, I skipped 474 classes, which apparently is an issue, and I think it was the fifth best high school in the country that I went to, McLean High School in Virginia. Really, really good high school. So a lot of very intelligent people, a lot of very affluent people there. I just didn't feel like I had a lot of time, to spend in high school. I was doing some other things, right? I was working.
You had other priorities.
I had other priorities.
Clear. Yeah.
So over time, it became clear that the school was unhappy with my performance. They apparently reached out to my parents and said, "We need to have a meeting." I didn't realize this at the time, but the meeting was about expelling me from high school. And so we came in, and my parents were somewhat exasperated over my lack of performance and skipping school, even though I wasn't doing anything wrong, right? I was working. So we're in this meeting, and they say, "Hey, Alex hasn't attended enough school to graduate." And I said, "Look, the problem here is that chemistry is pretty early in the morning, right? Can we slide that back to maybe 10, 11 o'clock?"
Right. I mean, why shouldn't that be a normal thought
and they
of
said something like, "This is high
16-year-old
school. You're supposed to be here when school happens. We're not here to create our schedule around you," which was upsetting to me, as you could imagine.
Yeah. I don't know why they wouldn't acquiesce to your choice there.
Why wouldn't they just shift everything around? So the counselor basically said, I think you can go to college. I think you can do dual enrollment in college. So at 16, I went to the local community college, and I did dual credits for however long. And then I graduated high school after I had a lot of college credits. Then I went to a pretty restrictive school. It was a religious school. I was dating somebody at the time that was going there, and I went out there, and didn't work out real well. Got kicked out of that school. Not for doing anything really wrong. This is college. Yep.
Okay.
So I violated the covenants they had around.
This is a rated G PG show, so
exactly.
Keep it PG.
What I would say is it was a pretty religious school, so you weren't supposed to have students of another. Yeah, you weren't supposed to have students of another sex in the same place. And so they found that out, somebody, whatever, and they just kicked me out. And I said, "Okay, forget it. I guess I won't. School is really not for me." But, in high school, got kicked out for not showing up, but I was working. In college, maybe I was kicked out for, something I should have been doing. But that led me to...
I see you like to follow rules.
That's right.
That's the pattern so far of this podcast.
I remember calling my parents with my wife and saying something like, "My son, every time we give him a restriction, he crosses the line." And then my wife said to my parents, "When did that stop with Alex?" And they said, "It stopped? You're saying that Alex has stopped breaking all the rules. Yeah. So I didn't like the restrictions, clearly.
Okay, so for those of you watching, Alex is a rule breaker.
Yeah, apparently, right. I just don't like to be confined to the normal rules that everybody else. Yeah. So when I left college, I was 19 at the time. I started working for an IT company. That was an opportunity that came through my parents' contacts. And I think I started out in the mailroom. And I remember they used to call me Piss Boy because there were a lot of the staff that they had were coming in from, Harvard and MIT, and it was a pretty robust tech company that I was working for. And so they all thought I was just an idiot, kid, which I probably was. So I went from the mailroom into the ID department and then started running some of their infrastructure and decided that I wanted to apply for another job. And fast forward a couple of years, not to make it too long of a story, I went to a couple other IT companies and ended up working at NASA headquarters in DC, making about $100,000 a year, when I was 19, and doing pretty well. Yeah. And I would say I used that income to buy my first piece of real estate. When I was 19, my dad was an engineer and my mom actually ran a title company. So she credit to her, right? She told me, you probably should buy a house. And I said, oh, how do I do that? And so she showed me an FHA mortgage and said, you only have to put down 3%. So I remember calling her years later and thanking her, saying, she's the reason I'm successful. But what she said in response to that was, well, I didn't make you buy the house. I told you how to do it and you did it. She also said, but what did you do? And I said, well, I renovated the house. And she said, then what did you do? I said, well, I sold it. And then what'd you do? And so the story is that by the time I was 25, I had made $500,000 in real estate, just moving every couple of years, buying a place, fixing it up, taking that income, buying another place, fixing it up. And I think when I was 25, I had, I think I was staring at, $500,000 in my bank account, and I owned, some homes. And I was very, very interested in real estate. So I started to, it was just something that I connected with as a child, architecture and design and real estate. So I used the proceeds from my primary residences to start buying land and building houses. I used the proceeds from that to start a real estate finance company, a mortgage company. And then I grew that company into the company that you and I partnered on much later in life.
That's right. Yeah. So let's back into the wealth creation formula.
Yeah.
So why don't you share, kind of take the wealth creation formula and apply it to your strategy. The theme of this podcast almost every week is for us to really regurgitate for our viewers this formula that we've developed and are really sharing just affirmation constantly of success stories that really prove and argue this formula. So if you could let's unravel it the formula related to your life.
Yeah. So the first step in my life was to learn a skill, right? And I did that at
specialized knowledge.
Specialized
in IT,
knowledge.
It sounds like?
In IT, correct.
Okay.
And I parlayed that skill into having a pretty nice paying job for that age, right? At that time. This was
specialized knowledge into a high paying job.
Right. 30 years ago, right?
Yeah.
Decent money 30 years ago, right? Yeah. I then took the excess income.
Investable income.
Right. And I acquired my first house.
Okay. Acquired an asset.
I renovated that asset, developed greater value, sold that asset, used the proceeds to buy another asset, did it again, and did it again. And then, so by the time I was 25, the proceeds of that was about $500,000. Right. And I still had my job and everything, right? I used those proceeds to start buying land and building houses. And I partnered with a local builder to do it. And my parents had never done this. my mom, having been in the real estate world, had worked with companies and for companies as a VP and a president and things like that. But I don't know that she had ever done this either. So it just made sense to me to do it. And I was just interested in it. Right. So started developing those projects, got out of that business. And my mother came to me and said, look, you've got a lot of experience in management because you're working with big companies. I'm building my title company. Why don't you come work with me? Right. When I came to work for that company, I noticed that in the suite right next door, there was a mortgage office, and those guys looked really happy, and
Okay.
they were having a ball. And so I was trying to run this title company, but it was like it was all these younger guys that seemed to be doing really well, and they were making a lot of noise. We had an office. So we talk about diversity. It's times we had an office that was primarily women. And the energy just was not as good as it could have been. The energy over there was great, but it was a little too out of control. So one of the first things I did is said, hey guys, why don't we share offices? And I infused the two groups together, and it kind of mellowed everything out. So it was a way for me to fix, in my mind, some of the cultural, issues that were existing in the two spaces. But it also gave me access to the knowledge on the mortgage side. So I started asking questions, right? You talk about asking questions. Tell me about these mortgages. Why does this coupon pay this, and why?
Did you ask them why they were all so happy?
Right. Well, they were telling me how much money they were making, so I assume that's why they were happy. But
got it.
But they effectively let me know very quickly that they didn't really know much about anything, and when I look at a system like that, and I understand that there's money in the system and that most of the people don't really know how the system works, it signaled to me an opportunity to develop a better system, and endeavor to be in that space in sort of a different way than they were. Right. So I decided to go into that business, and I started working for that same bank. I think my third month, you talked about your second month in, right, of lending. I think my third month, I made $30,000 right in the month, and didn't really even try. So people would call me and they'd say, hey, I'm thinking about getting a mortgage. And I'd say, well, I don't think that's a really good idea because refinancing doesn't make sense for you. And so I was honest with the people, and I was more of a consultative, salesperson.
Mm-hmm.
They seemed to like it. So they would refer another customer, and all of a sudden I had all these customers. At the same time, I was learning where the money was coming from, which was the more interesting thing for me. And I remember asking, I'm sure you've been down that road, right? I remember asking, I don't understand why the premiums are this way on this coupon and this. And they're like, Alex, here's what you need to know. Here's a sheet of paper, right? If you sell a mortgage at 7%, you get this. You sell it at 7.5%, you get this, right? That's all they knew. They didn't know anything about how it worked.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, they had underwriters in their offices. So I started to learn how the loans were underwritten. And about 3 months later, I started my own brokerage. Not too dissimilar to what you did.
Right.
About a year later, I got a line of credit and started lending. 2 years later, I had 1,200 employees at 36 offices throughout the United States. And I did that through leveraging the principles of the book. I leveraged the skill set that I developed to understand the system and to create a model whereby I could not only just provide an environment in which I could originate and sell mortgages, but I in my mind, I built a system that allowed me to go out to other people and say, hey, my system's probably better than what you have. Why don't you join me? You could make the same amount of money or more with less headache. So I leveraged the skill set that I had to go out and acquire people doing the same thing. And I became an aggregator, essentially, of mortgages. And that's how I built the company.
So your IT and
correct,
the way your engineering mind thinks, that was your core competency, and you built a system that people could plug into.
Right.
Is accurate?
That's right. Yeah. And the goal was to, with more volume, generally you get better pricing, right?
Yeah.
So as I was aggregating volume from multiple companies, I could go into a company and show them how I could provide them better pricing. They would have less headache, no HR, no compliance. They could just do what they were doing at a lower cost and make more money. And it was a pretty easy sell for them.
Yeah. So you and I were fortunate enough to have an exit together. I guess December of 2012 was when we signed the papers. We got paid in 2013. And since then, kind of tell us what you've been investing in, what your strategies have been. I don't want to spoil it. I know the answers, but
right.
Take us up to today.
I think it's so we've like the League Capital Fund. We started together, and that's a fund in which we originate mortgages and produce commercial loans, and we use leverage from other institutions to do that, and some of our own capital. We've got a number of investors in that, so that's a lending operation that's somewhat levered.
Mm-hmm.
So did some of that because of the fact that we're originating commercial mortgages and construction loans. It made sense for us to have a development company and other companies in that business. So we've essentially I've worked to set up a development company, general contracting firm, and all the trades related to that. So we now own an architecture firm, a general contracting firm, a development company, an electrical company. I could go on, but a lot of those, and I think those are useful, for the construction lending efforts that we have. At the same time, I've been acquiring, more real estate and other assets. And I think when I look back at some of my biggest mistakes, because there's been a ton of them, I never invested. I never felt comfortable with the stock market because I wanted to control the investment strategy. So I had started out with some money in the stock market years and years ago, was unhappy with how it was performing compared to how I thought I could do it myself, and paired out of that investment a long time ago. Now, had I left that investment in place, I would be in a much different situation now. So that was bad. But the point is that the other thing that I've been doing is diversifying and investing in the stock market, but I can take a line of credit against that investment and use that as leverage to produce additional investments.
Right.
So I would say, acquiring assets, real estate assets, investing in the stock market, and using leverage on both of those is what I've done with the income that we've made over the years, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And for our viewers, one of the attributes we always talk about is, what are you doing for income and the scalability of income, and what are you doing to continually acquire assets? It seems from what I know of you is you're never sitting still. You're constantly looking for new assets to acquire, ways to continue to leverage and grow, which is really a great thing as your business partner. It's a great thing.
Right. I think when you feel like the least intelligent person in the room, maybe it creates a little bit more drive. So like you, I'm always working, right? But I also enjoy what I do. So it doesn't feel so much like work all the time. But I don't know that I've taken a day off for close to 20 years, including the weekends. And I think there's nothing special about what I've done. But what I would say is I probably put a lot more time and effort into income creation strategies and wealth creation strategies than some other people. And it probably shows. And I think that doing that over a long period of time and making some right decisions has led to a reasonable amount of success, for sure.
Yeah. So just before we close, what's the biggest mistake you made?
And there are so many, but I think the biggest mistake I made was not using leverage soon enough, because I've I think you got out of the gate quicker than I did in terms of investing in real estate. You could argue that one way or another, right? But you really had a process to go and acquire assets. I should have utilized leverage, understood and utilized leverage a lot sooner in my life. And if I did, I probably worth a lot more money now.
Yeah, I think there's a statement in the course From Worry to Wealth that says, when is the best time to buy assets? And I think it starts off and it says 20 years ago
Right.
is the best time.
Right.
And the second best time is now.
Right. Exactly.
And I think that's a good illustration that
For sure.
you and I are both in that camp. To your point, I did start buying assets very young.
Right.
Stupidly, I sold them very young.
Right.
And, the lesson for our viewers is we're both saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Buy assets early if you can and hold on to them.
Hold on to them. Because
they will make a material difference.
Yep.
Any other words of advice before we wrap this up? I can share, we can make a joke. I think the best decision you've ever made is partnering with me.
Well, there's no question about that. But
that hands down.
I thought your worst decision was when you didn't call me back the first time I called you.
That's true. That's true. I don't know. But you use humor way more than I use humor in your everyday life. And I think that's an attribute that I'll have to work on, the humor part.
Oh, you're great at it.
No, I'm a serious guy. Anything else you think before we wrap up? That's
the only thing I would say is that our lives are a blueprint for this system, and I think many people's lives are. The key is starting as soon as you can, as you mentioned, and also, for goodness sakes, it would be nice if somebody learned from our mistakes, right?
Yeah.
So learn from our mistakes. That's what I would say. That's my advice.
And I think, as we develop out this podcast for our viewers, just to reiterate for everybody, this podcast is really about all the guests we bring in that will tell their stories and how they applied the wealth creation formula. We wanted to share Alex's background on this podcast. We shared my background on another podcast, but this podcast is not about your background or mine so much as it is this process or this formula that we preach here, that is really the mission and the message, that to go from worry to wealth, or as I say, from broke to wealth, is a very process-driven thing. And as an engineer, your mind is more process-driven, I think, than anybody I know. And I think we can have fun sharing these stories about how we unravel the wealth creation formula. So it's fun. Thanks for being my partner on this. And for those of you watching, we'll see you on the next episode.